is correct case information. So when somebody comes to me and asks me to do a case, say, I'm going to pick a recent one, a family member, a family friend of the Watts family. I don't know if everybody heard, probably too much so, about Chris Watts. The gentleman, he's not a gentleman at all, actually, he's gross. The man that killed his wife and 2 children recently. That was probably the latest case that I was working on, and the astrology actually led to the bodies of his wife and his children. And as I don't know how much everybody's into true crime or how much you know of what you watch on Facebook, but everything is available to find out all the information. You know, when Chris Watts went and did this awful thing, that's all I heard about for, you know, every time I jumped on the internet, that's all I could hear about. So finding times and dates and information is absolutely critical, and it's quite easy when you've got Facebook with all these people talking about these crimes and the news and media on it just like that, as they are. So, yeah, there's no room for error. So if somebody comes to me and says, I need a chart done, you know, like I said before, sometimes I'll do a horary, I'll do whatever I can do. That's me pushing myself, really. But when you don't have a time, it's virtually impossible to do it, because when we're doing mapping, and we'll get into the mapping, it gets extremely specific. And if we get the house cusps out by 1 degree or 2 degrees, it's far too far to look. Because as you'll know, when someone goes missing, you have to start looking for them at the place that they were last seen and then spread outwards. And there's enough places that we have to go with the chart that we erect that is correct, let alone trying to find places to go where we haven't got a correct chart as well. So it's just super important that we get that timing correct. So a lot of it is groundwork. You need to find out about the case. Don't go in empty-handed trying to sort of prove that astrology works. That's something that I've had to really you'll have to. I'm having a transit at the moment with Mercury and Uranus, my own Mercury and Uranus opposing Uranus, and my words are just not wanting to come out properly. So please bear with me.
You're doing great, and you're very clear and extremely understandable. You're golden.
Thank you. So basically, the best times that you can get, and what seems to be popping up more and more, is CCTV footage with crimes. So quite often we'll see that, you know, the last time someone has been seen is on CCTV footage, and that has, you know, a little timestamp in the corner and the date. So we've got a specific time and date, and we can erect a chart using that. So CCTV is good. Emergency service calls, last seen times by reliable sources, like I said. Now, in that case, say Chris Watts, for example, you know, you wouldn't be asking the immediate family or him what time he saw his wife last, because he's the suspect. So, you know, in most cases like this, the immediate family is always going to be suspect number one. Doesn't matter if they've done it or not. I'm not saying that they did do it, but they are the suspect, so they're not always a reliable source. But quite often you can gauge that. I mean, I talk to the people, the victims' families, so I can tell, you know, people mostly don't come to me if they've done something wrong. They have before, though, so that's not completely true. I have had people come to me to see whether I know information that they know, and I do know. So if they get to watch this, I know. But anyway, if I don't get accurate timing, I'm a little hesitant to do the chart. I will try. I will do a horary chart. I'll do whatever I can. But it just starts to get really difficult. You know, like in a criminal case, the first try, I will do a horary chart, I'll do whatever I can, but it just starts to get really difficult. You know, like in a criminal case, the first 48 hours is important. The same with this astrology. If you can work with the case at the same time, it works far better than trying to work on a cold case 10 years later. So, and I'm not sure why the universe does that, but it does. And it helps us out with that 48-hour time window. So if you're in my criminal astrology group, you may notice that we try and work on cases as they're happening. And when we do, they are much clearer and everything comes out, very accurate when we're doing it in real time. Okay, I'll move along. Can I ask if anyone's got any questions, Em?
I was just curious, actually. Yeah, I was really surprised you mentioned casting a chart, and I thought you were going to go right into horary. So that was just really enlightening in itself. So I really appreciate that. Yeah. I was just wondering the regular old questions in terms of house systems and orbs and all that fun stuff. If you've noticed if you obviously have your preferences.
I use Placidus. Sorry, my accent, I don't know if it's... Placidus sounds very Australian. It has worked 100% of the time for me. I've looked at other chart systems and absolutely perhaps they may work, and I would encourage other people and encourage yourself to have a look at them and use them. I've explored every avenue and I will continue to explore every avenue with it, but Placidus house system is definitely accurate. The interceptions even show us things, so it's even important to have those interceptions. They're not in the way in this type of astrology. Well, they're never in the way really, but sometimes people tend to prefer to use whole sign or something because they don't want to see those interceptions for some reason. And orbs, basically I'll go, with all of my astrology, I use orbs as absolutely as tight as humanly possible. So if we've got something that's a 0 or 1 degree orb, then I'm going to pick up on that quicker than something that's further. I would never use a 10 degree orb, ever, even with the lights, even with the sun or the moon. It's far too far. And if we're using 10 degrees to the left and 10 degrees to the right, we're covering so much that, again, when we convert that onto a map, that's degrees of space that we're actually, using, and we can't. So we have to use really small orbs, if not 0 degrees, 1 degree. So quite often my eye goes to conjunctions immediately. That they stand out more than anything in these charts are the conjunctions. And as you'll see when I discuss a couple of charts that I've got up, it's always conjunctions that seem to trigger off these things with house cusps or angles as well, and always with very small degrees. But if I am looking for an aspect between two different rulers, and they're, say, 3 or 4 degrees apart, that sort of shows me...
Loki.
And I'll go further into that, but it shows the level of relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. So sometimes we can see that the closer the orb, the closer the relationship between the two people that are involved in this. So it's that we don't wipe out the orbs if they're further than 1 degree. We just look at it a little bit differently. So just a general Placidus system, very small orbs, conjunctions are very important. I don't use asteroids like people tend to these days. Sometimes I'll use a name asteroid if there is a name that's specific to that person. But that's just to help out. I prefer fixed stars. So my charts remain minimal. You won't see 1,000 asteroids and every other component on astro.com on my charts as well. So we keep it minimal and simple, and I always use the part of fortune, Chiron, the vertex, and the Lilith as well. They're the only extras.
So Ingrid just wondered, sometimes if the orb is 2 or 3, would it get into play, or would it always be sort of Nat's ass? She didn't say that. I'm the one with the scorpion.
No, it can definitely be in play. And as you'll see when I show you a chart or a couple of charts on here, they do go into play, but it seems that the closer the orb, the closer the timing that you're getting to in terms of what happened in that particular crime. My own head, but
it does.
Yeah, it's almost as if you can imagine the orb is a space in, as it is, it's space in time that's also occurring. If there's a ruler of the ascendant and the descendant that are in aspect to each other, which I'll just explain in a minute, and they're exactly 1 degree or 0 degrees in conjunction, then I can see that the person in question and the perpetrator, who's the 1st and the 7th house, were in a close relationship of some sort. 2-3 degrees, it starts to become, perhaps that's a friend, perhaps, and then you go a bit further out, and that can be perhaps it's an acquaintance. So I know this sounds really strange, and you've probably never heard orbs being talked about like this, but I think you'll understand it more as we go a little bit further on as well. So, was that okay to answer that part of that question?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so the hardest part, in my opinion, for doing this entire type of astrology is getting the right ruler for the right situation. Because as you know, with missing persons and murders and everything that happens, so many different things happen, and we need to find the exact ruler, obviously, to find where we're going to map. We need to know who's represented by what in the chart. So what you always have to do, and I find myself doing this often, it is pulling yourself back into the question of what you're doing. Don't look at a chart and try and interpret everything to do with the crime because you're looking at one chart. You want to look at that chart in terms of the question as to why you've erected that chart. It's almost as important as horary. When we're doing horary and we're asking the universe this really important question and to give us an answer, it's very much the same. The intention goes into this, and it's a similar sort of thing. So yeah, keep the question in focus, but also don't not allow yourself to explore other areas. I'll show you as well as I keep them. Okay, so if we have I'm using 2 case examples in this webinar. I'm going to use Mollie Tibbetts, and she was taken while she was jogging in Brooklyn, Iowa in July of 2018, just last year. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that case. Also, I'm going to be using a case that I use quite often, actually, and that's Jessica Runions and Kara Kopetsky, 2 women that were actually found on the chart line. So I'm going to go into these 2 charts. I'm just going to use, to start with, I'll use Mollie Tibbetts as an example. So I'm giving you a name. So we've got a missing person. We've got Mollie Tibbetts. Her chart is on here, by the way, and I will show you in a minute. She is represented at that last time she was seen jogging down the street. She's represented by the ascendant. The victim is always represented by the ascendant. Then, as per horary rules, the moon also co-rules the victim as well. So we have the ascendant ruler. So it's the ascendant ruler actually rules Mollie in this example, and on the ascendant, and then the perpetrator is the 7th house cusp, directly opposite Mollie. Now, the way I see it is, imagine, I don't know if you can imagine yourself as a chart. I imagine myself as I'm looking through the first house. I am Mollie, and I'm looking through that, on that axis, on the first house to that 7th house. And that's that other person who's our open enemy. We know the 7th house to be the open enemy, staring straight at us. So to me, that's how I see the victim and the perpetrator in these charts, the ascendant and the descendant. It's not always just limited to those. As I said, the moon co-rules the victim. Your victim, you've got your perpetrator, directly opposite the 1st and the 7th house.
Yeah, and also, isn't that the house of thievery, and didn't they steal the person's life as well?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of houses for thievery, really. I mean, you can also look at the 2nd house cusp as well. That can show us taking, someone away from their situation. But yeah, the 7th house well, directly, I wouldn't say it's thievery so much, because it's sort of, it doesn't always just show us a missing person. It can also show us a murdered person as well, like the ascendant and the descendant. So it's not always taking a person, sometimes it's actually just killing a person. So it's just in that line of sight. But I think probably the most interesting way, or the most important way to think about it, is that it's an open enemy, the 7th house. So you've got your open enemy looking directly at you. Your secret enemies, or your hidden enemies, are supposed to be in the 12th house. I don't find that actually pertains a lot to what I do, to be perfectly frank. It's usually always open enemies because, we're looking for someone who's done something, and they have done something. If it's a child missing that's under the age of 5, I look to the 5th house cusp. And that's actually quite specific. You don't really want to go over the age of 5 and use the 5th house cusp. And that's just through experience, to be honest. There's not really much more reason than that. In my experience, when a child is older than 5, we would just use the ascendant and the moon. But for some reason, when we have a small child, I like to use the 5th house cusp as well, and just see what's going on with that. And that tends to show us some things. So, as I've just said, the suspect or the perpetrator is always represented by the 7th house cusp. Their ruler of the 7th house cusp represents that suspect or that person. And then any other planets in the 7th house also shows us what might have happened, possibly how this person appeared, so we can get a description of how they look from the 7th house as well. The 7th house shows us absolutely tons of information. And if you like, you can do anything with this. Like I said, I'm still learning. Obviously, there's no strict rules really, but I've started using more and more derived houses as well. So if you have a specific person that's missing, someone's come to you and said, my auntie's boyfriend is missing, you could use a derived house system to see the rulership for that auntie's boyfriend. So the person asking you the question in that instance would be the ascendant. And then if they're asking about their auntie, so their auntie is what would be the 3rd house from the 4th house, and then the 3rd house, which is the sibling of their mother, 3rd from the 4th, and then it's their brother, the 3rd house from that. So you can go on, and you can do your derived houses and find your ruler from there too. But that's sort of something that I just play with every now and then. It doesn't seem to be necessary as everything else that tends to show up. Okay, the majority of the time when I do these charts, there is an interaction between the open enemy and the victim, or the rulers of the ascendant and the descendant. So that's the very first thing that I look for. I look for the ruler of the ascendant, the ruler of the descendant, and see if they're in aspect to each other. Most often they are. And then that actually shows me that there's some type of relationship between the two people, like I was explaining before, depending on the orb, depending on the aspect. And I will go into that a little bit more as well. Okay, so this is, I don't know if everybody's seen my last YouTube video or knows about this case at all, but this is the case of Jessica Runions and Kara Kopetsky. I was asked by Jessica's auntie to look for Jessica. This was in, it was a couple of years ago now. And she was, she'd been missing just for a short period of time when I was asked to do it. So it's hard to explain this story, but I'll try as hard as I can. So it began with Jessica, who's this lovely young lady down the bottom here, and to the left with the piercing. That's Jessica. And this lady here is, or young girl, sorry, is Kara Kopetsky. Now, Kara just happened to be somebody that popped up halfway through doing this crime chart. So it's a fascinating case and a fascinating set of charts. So just know that I was asked by Jessica's family to look into it, and I knew nothing about Kara Kopetsky at the time. I just knew that Jessica was missing. Okay. All right. So this is the last seen chart for Jessica Runions. She was last seen leaving a party, and it's a viable source because like I said, I was asked by her auntie. So she had nothing, there's no reason for her to lie about time frames, and plus it was verified with police, etc. I verify everything as much as I possibly can to get a time. So she was actually seen walking out of a party with a male at 11:30 on the 8th of September 2016. And so this is the chart that I erected for that moment in time. And it was 11:30. I was told 11:30 on the dot. You have to wonder when you get told that if it's 11:30 or 11 or 12, is it exactly right? Because not everything happens on the dot like that. This is the time I was given, and it worked out perfectly. So, okay, I'll just give you a little rundown. So Jessica was a 21-year-old girl who had been was going out with a guy who's not involved in this at all, but she went to a party with a friend of her boyfriend's and a friend of hers. And I'll say who he is. His name's Kyler Eust. He's now in prison, and he's on trial for the murder of Kara and Jessica. So I'm just going to skip to that bit. I'm going to mention him because he's on trial and I'm able to. So Jessica left the party at 11:30 with Kyler Eust, her friend. Now, the first thing... Oh, sorry. No? Okay, I thought someone was going to say something. Okay, as you'll see, like I was discussing before, Gemini on the ascendant and Sagittarius on the descendant. It just pops up so much. These two, it's amazing actually how often they pop up like that. So we have 12 degrees of Gemini on the ascendant. So the ruler of Jessica... I'll get my annotation thing here. The ruler of Jessica is Mercury at 24 degrees of Virgo, and the ascendant and the descendant being 12 degrees. The very first thing that I would do in my mapping, so I would take a note down in my notebook. I would put that I want to go 12 miles out from the last point that she was seen at. That's just as simple as that is. That's the very first thing that I go to, is I'm going to go 12 miles. And it often works as well, just the AC and the DC being the distance. So the ruler being Mercury down here, Jessica. And then we have the ruler of the 7th house, which is Sagittarius. So the ruler of that is Jupiter. And have a look at this. At 29 degrees of Virgo, right next to Mercury in the 5th house. So she was leaving a party, the 5th house, with him. There's him, and there's her. So they were literally that close. That's how close together they were. I'm going to get rid of those, sorry. Now, we do have an orb there, obviously. It's not exact. Mercury's at 24 degrees and Jupiter's at 29 degrees. So we have got a bit of a wide orb there. So initially that made me think, okay, well, these two people know each other, but they're not extremely close. I didn't feel that they were lovers. I didn't feel that they were together. At this point in time, I didn't know too much about what was going on. I didn't know she had another boyfriend, actually. But I didn't feel as though these two were boyfriend and girlfriend, but that they just left this party together. So as it turned out, that was the case. They were just friends. But Kyler didn't see her as a friend. He wanted more from her, and that ultimately resulted in what happened, but I'll explain that further. So, yeah, simply we can see here that the 12-degree Gemini ascendant, which rules Jessica, is Mercury, and the 12-degree Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, and that's conjunct Mercury in the 5th house of parties and entertainment and whatever. And they were leaving a party. He was drinking. She'd had a couple of drinks, not as many as him. So that shows us pretty clearly that that's where, this chart's correct. It's right. They've walked out of there together. Okay, I always note the 8th house cusp as well. Now, unfortunately, on this example here, I haven't got the house cusps, so we can't see the 8th house cusp, but it's actually at 4 degrees of Capricorn. So you write down your 8th house cusp, because we want to use the cusps and angles as the tools for direction, so always note down those. The 4th and the 10th as well, the MC and the IC, you want to note down those degrees also and the sign that they're in. So basically just always write down your angles first off. Note if the two rulers are aspecting each other, which they are. So, yeah, what have I written here? We've got Jupiter and Mercury are the rulers. A party is the 5th house. Now, Neptune up there in the 10th house. It showed me alcohol because I can see this big grand square here, or grand cross. I'm not sure what you guys call it. But having this 7th house stuff here, Saturn, the Moon, and Mars on that 7th house cusp, Saturn is just below the 7th house there, like I was explaining before, like just on the 7th house cusp, but just below it. So that's involved in that tight square. See, it's at 10 degrees, Neptune's at 10 degrees, and they're squaring each other. So I can see there's alcohol involved. There's some sort of impairment with them, you know, and that because it's including them down. I'll get my annotation thing as well. You know, it's including them in here, the action and the perpetrator here, the alcohol and the situation there, and then the victim, Jessica, there, this big grand square. It all relates. So we can see sort of how this chart works out in terms of what happened at that point in time. I see Mars there like that, and I know that they left the party in a car. I was given that information. I can see that something's happened in this car as well. Although that's showing me that he's angry and he's done something through emotion, it's also showing me that they've left in the car, because it's all aspecting each other, the Moon and Mars and Mercury and everything down here. So they've left in the car. Where have we got? Oh, and Mercury being the ruling planet as well, as I said before, makes me go, okay, there's two people involved here. We know there is. We know there's the two people that are involved, but you'll see something else as well in a second. Now, the ascendant being Jessica, what I like to look for as well is the closest aspect to the ascendant. And as you'll notice, Venus is at 12 degrees of Libra. So that's exactly trining the ascendant there. So the closest aspect to the ascendant or to Jessica is Venus. And as you'll recall, before I was explaining that Venus can show a love interest. So this sort of shows me, okay, she's, you know, he definitely was interested in her. And it also is interesting to me that it's in a dual sign as well. I just kept on seeing dualities, in fact, when I looked at this chart. So I started to question whether I had all the information in this chart because of the Gemini and the closest aspect being in another double sign. So I asked some more information about the chart, and I thought, well, probably about the circumstances, the best thing I can do is have a look at, to start with, is have a look at Jessica's natal chart. Sorry, I'm trying to erase this and it's not working. So I pulled up Jessica's natal chart and I had the exact information because it's through her family. And look at what we have here. 12 degrees Gemini. The moon in Sagittarius. It's exactly, the house cusps are the same. I'm going to go back again. So this is the last time Jessica was seen. You see the moon in Sagittarius there on the 7th house. 12 Gemini, 12 Saggy. We have 1850 Leo and 1850 Aquarius for the MC and the IC. This is her natal chart. 12 Gemini, the moon in the 7th house in Sagittarius. We've got one less than a degree difference with the MC and the IC. It's actually quite remarkable how exact this is. The chances of her natal chart being exactly the same as the chart of her last being seen, you know, with the house cusps is pretty remote. So when I saw this, I thought, okay, there's something even more going on that I don't know about. So I need more information. First of all, I'll just quickly run through this. Mercury was ruling Jessica in the other chart, and now we have it in her natal charts at 29 degrees, and that's something that I notice often as well. 29-degree critical points show up all the time in these charts. So if you note 29 degrees, you're onto something. Follow that pattern. If you've seen my other videos, if you've seen that Ted Bundy one especially, you'll know how I'm into the 29 degrees. So when something's at 29 degrees, something's not quite right. It's on the precipice of something being very wrong. In saying that, you can't look at somebody's natal chart and go, oh, no, you've got a 29-degree Mercury, and that might have ruled an event in the future that may possibly kill you, you know. So we can't assume anything from a natal chart. But in okay, so I saw that the house cards were identical. Gemini again, it's just showing me two over and over and over, two things. But the first thing that I wanted to do when I saw this natal chart was I wanted to know on the map from the last point that she was seeing, where is 12 degrees Gemini? Because it just kept on popping up at that point in time. So I'm skipping forward. This is just a shot of the map. 12 degrees Gemini, and I will show you how I do this, goes to this, and it was 12 miles out, as you'll recall. I'll go back again. Because of the DC and the AC, I wanted to use that as the mileage going outwards. This is a 9-mile radius here, so at about 12 miles, we had Longview Lake. And that was going in the direction of 12 Gemini. So I said to the family, I think it's important that you go to Longview Lake. As it turned out, they were actually planning on going to that lake anyway within the week to search. They went there to search, but they didn't find Jessica, but they actually found 3 other murdered people on the way. It's what I like to call cleaning up the trash in astrology. When we start to put these charts together, you start to find other people. It's the strangest thing, but it happens, and it happened in this case. 3 other people were found. 2 other people were found while Jessica's family were looking for her, and then a little bit later on, a man was found murdered in this lake as well. So for some reason, these charts don't just show us the specifics of one particular thing. It cleans up the trash as well along the way. I've found quite often that the majority of the charts that we do, there's someone else that's found before the person we're looking for is found as well. And it even happened in the Mollie Tibbetts case as well. When they were looking for Mollie Tibbetts, they found another girl while they were looking for her. And it was also on the charts too. So that's something that I've been noticing. It's really interesting. It's a whole chapter in my next book, Cleaning Out the Trash. It's going to be called. Now, to skip ahead, I'm going to summarise all of this, and it'll all make sense a whole lot more by the time we get to the end of it. I know it's going back and forth, but it's sort of very tricky to show all these things at once. While I was in the middle of doing the other case, the duality of the Gemini and the double signs, and just in my head I could see that there was something that wasn't, I didn't know all the information. And it wasn't just that there was 2 people involved in, him and her. It was that there was something else. And then, so I wrote to her auntie and then found out that the same person that Jessica left with at the party, Kylie used, 10 years prior, had a girlfriend by the name of Kara Kopetsky who went missing. So the same man had a girlfriend 10 years prior who went missing the 911 call was made at 5:30 p.m. on the 4th of May 2007 for Kara Kopetsky in the same area. Now, this absolutely blew my mind that there was even another person involved in this case. but I had a feeling that there was because it just kept on showing me these double signs. So I erected the chart for Kara for the 911 call. And then you'll notice here the ascendant is 12 degrees of Libra, which you'll remember is Venus in Jessica's last seen chart, 12 degrees of Libra. Has now become the ascendant in the last seen chart of Kara Kopetsky, 10 years prior, mind you. So it's like, okay, there's what's going on here. And then let's have a look at the moon. It's at 12 degrees of Sagittarius as well. I was in the prior charts. So the moon at 13 degrees of Sagittarius in Jessica's last seen chart. And then Jessica's natal chart, the moon is at 17 degrees Sagittarius. You know, repetitiveness is important to notice. That's just something that I've really noticed a lot lately. If you see something repetitive, stick with that line of questioning and go with it. Okay. So 12 degrees Libra became the next point that I wanted to look at, basically, because it showed up so clearly in that first one being the closest aspect to the ascendant, and now it's become the ascendant of the last time that Kara Kopetsky was seen. She was going out with Kylie Eust at that time. It was right at this point in time that it became really apparent to me that we were going to find these girls together. And I knew that was what was happening in the beginning. There was something that just, that Gemini, the Mercury, everything was showing me that something was going to happen in pairs. And as soon as I saw this chart, I was like, that's it, they're going to be found together. And keeping in mind, Kara had been missing for a long time. By this, it's 2007, and this was just last year that we were doing the case. So the chances of them being together were actually pretty slim because Jessica had only been missing 6 months, Kara missing 10 years. Anyway, to cut a long story short, as we were doing the mapping and we were about to get to mapping 12 degrees of Libra, the girls were found. Both of their heads, I'm sorry for the gruesome details, both of their heads were found at exactly 192 degrees on the map from their last point of being seen, which is 12 degrees of Libra. So we were looking over out here at the lake to start with that 12 Gemini. And they went out and had a look and couldn't find them. Then we were about to literally go looking down this line. Now, you have to start up the top. You couldn't just go, okay, now walk 9 miles and start digging. It doesn't work like that. So they would have to start close and work their way out. But as it so happened, a mushroom picker walked past and just found both of their heads laying on the side of the road, which was really strange to me considering that Kara had been dead for 10 years. It still doesn't sit right with me that they were both found at the same place as the case was unfolding. And in fact, Kylie Eust, when he was arrested with his brother, and his brother has since committed suicide because he knew what had happened. And I have to be honest, I feel as though the brother possibly knew where Kara and Jessica were and put them in a visible location to be found. Because I don't believe for a minute that Kylie Eust wanted Jessica or Kara to be found. Now, Mollie Tibbetts, she's the next beautiful girl that went missing. She was here in Brooklyn, Iowa, watching her boyfriend's dogs at his house and then went for a jog. And she was last seen at 7:30 at night. Okay. So here's the information for her. 7:30, she was seen jogging in the neighbourhood, and it's a reliable source because it's a neighbour who's seen her. Excuse me. The ruler of Mollie is Saturn because Capricorn's on the ascendant and it's sitting in that 12th house. So immediately it showed me that her body is hidden somewhere. I knew that she wasn't in a good position and wasn't in a good way because this... Sorry, now my pen doesn't want to work. All of these malefics around the ascendant here just really didn't bode well at all. Saturn being in Capricorn in that 12th house, Saturn's a malefic, Pluto is a malefic, Mars is a malefic. They're all very angry, they're all retrograde, and they're all on her ascendant. I just didn't like it immediately. It appeared like something wasn't right. So, you know, I thought straight away her body's been hidden somewhere. We're not going to find it easily, and that's that 12th house. Oh, gosh. Sorry. My buttons aren't working now. All right. Okay, so the co-ruler is the moon at 16 degrees of Libra. Hang on, actually I might just jump forward. Get some more information here. Okay, here I've got another chart here that's actually got the degrees on the outside as well. That would be the very first place that I would map in this instance. I would have gone, okay, well, that's, you know, that's pretty clear. We'll turn that 4 degrees into the 274 and we'll map that. What else have we got here? Oh, okay. And so there's a few places that, as I mentioned before, that we turn into whole signs as well. So we'll look at, we're not going to look at the suspect at this point because I just want to try and skip on by a little bit. The 8th house cusp is at 20 degrees of Leo, and Mercury is at 21, conjunct the 8th house cusp. And that the Mercury point is important because she was jogging at the time in her neighbourhood. You know, that 3rd house area, that Mercury stuff. She was, you know, at that, we come back to that point of realising what the question is about. Where was she? She was jogging at the time. So Mercury really does represent that action of jogging. So that's an interesting one. And I turned that into whole sign as well. So that is 141 degrees whole sign. So 21 degrees plus 120 for Leo. So 141 degrees for Mercury, or 140 for the 8th house cusp. So we have a few different areas that we would map. Okay. I've just turned them into their degrees here. I've just explained that. The Venus, Saturn. We've got the AC and the DC, which is 8 to 8.38 miles out. And the 8th house cusp at 20 degrees of Leo. You could go on and on forever really converting all different ones, but you need to start with a certain amount. So this is, you know, these are the ones that I was starting with. Okay. Now, this is the map, and I'm going to show you in real time, and it shouldn't take too much longer. So I'm sorry I'm taking everyone's time. I've noticed some people have vanished as well.
No, it's okay. Concern yourself. I'm conscious of how much effort it takes to do this, and we've had 2 hours of your time already, which is quite cheeky. I'm really enjoying it.
Oh no, I'm glad you're enjoying it. I sort of wish it didn't take so long, but I'm glad it does too, because otherwise we wouldn't. It'd be too hard to explain it. Okay, so we need to get addresses and places where people were last seen. There's no point just, having a vague area because we can't map it. You need an address. So that's when it's important when I go back to the start by saying getting information, case information is really, really important. So the last place that she was at 622 West Des Moines Street. And then she just went west a little bit. She jogged a little bit west. But what I'm going to do is pull up, not that. Okay, this is Scribble Maps. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with Scribble Maps or not, but it is probably the best program that I've ever used, actually. Sorry, I've got to just get my bum's a bit sore. So due west, 0 Cancer, that's that. That's this there, bearing of 90. 180 for if it was Libra. 270 if it was Capricorn. And it's 274. Okay, so you see it now, I've drawn that line at 274 from the last place you were seen to the outside. So that goes over this way. Now, so that's 8 miles and 8.38 miles outwards and 274 degrees directionally if we're using Saturn as her ruling planet. Now, as you know, things like these sort of cases, things change all the time and you find out more information as you go. I know that when she started jogging, she went west. So the chances of her being over here at this Saturn line was pretty slim, and it wasn't really feeling right, and you can't just stick at one line anyway. So I wanted to progress even further. So I thought, okay, well, let's use I was just pulling things out of thin air because at the beginning you don't know where to start really, So I thought we'll start at the moon after Saturn as well. 16 of Libra, so 196. So we'll go back to this point and we find 196 in the bearing section, which is there. Now, I pop that there, and then I'll go out. Once I did this, something I found that was interesting, we went out a little bit further. I think it was about 3 days or 2 days after she went missing, there was an apparent sighting, apparently, in Montezuma. So that was the moon leading straight to that area. But it was further. It was 11 miles out, not 8 miles. I thought, okay, well that's interesting. Maybe she really actually is alive, and maybe she's in Montezuma. But then that turned out to be, someone thought they saw her and they didn't. So we disregarded that one. So then the next thing that I wanted to look at was the 8th house cusp and Mercury, because she was jogging along the street, because she was in the neighbourhood. It just stood out that was the next thing to have a look at. So Mercury, I'm just going to I'll get rid of these. I can. Oh, goodness, come on. Okay. All right. So Mercury's at 21 Leo, so that's 141 degrees when we turn it into the zodiac, the whole sign. So if we start at the middle and go to 141, we're about there. As you'll see, the bearing says 141. So when you can use this hand tool to move it around as well. Let's have a zoom in. And it turned out that that point there led to this little farming area in Guernsey off 220th Street and 21st Street. It's hard to see here. Maybe I'll put on a different terrain. This, can you see where I'm pointing there? Where that, literally where that found. Now that is at that Mercury point. So this is what I would usually do. Mercury, it was 141 degrees in the chart. That's where her body was. And it actually turned out to be, and it took me a long time to find this out, but the mileage from the place where she was last seen, it was a tiny bit more than this, and it actually was 8 miles and, I'll get it, 8.46 miles. So it wasn't 8.38 like I thought because of the descendant and the ascendant. It was 8.46, but that's so close. It's in the same farmland. It's in that same area. And you could check that with any map and anything on the internet that you'll see that that's exactly where it goes. It's where that Mercury is in the chart. So obviously, you know, you can't just follow the rule of the ruling planet is going to be where her body is or their body is, or the fourth house cusp is going to be where their body is. You have to go through all of the options and work with the information that you're given at the time, what you find out on a daily basis,